The hunting preserve stretched across 3 moons, each one carefully terraformed to provide the perfect environment for what the Zephyrians called the ultimate sport. Towering crystalline spires reflected the light of twin suns, casting rainbow patterns across purple grasslands where deadly creatures from a dozen worlds roamed freely. The air itself hummed with energy barriers and monitoring devices, ensuring that no prey could escape the carefully controlled killing ground. High above the preserve, the luxury observation deck of the hunting vessel Apex Dominion buzzed with excitement. Dozens of the galaxy's wealthiest beings had gathered for this special event, their chittering, growling, and electronic communications filling the air as they placed bets on the outcome. The Zephyrians, with their sleek silver scales and predatory grace, moved among their guests with practiced hospitality, ensuring that every credit-bearing spectator felt appropriately entertained. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished entities, announced Hunt Master Veltar, his voice carrying the authority of one who had organized hundreds of such events. His 4 arms gestured dramatically toward the massive viewing screens that dominated one wall of the observation deck. Today marks a historic moment in the annals of galactic sport. For the first time in our prestigious hunting preserve's 3-century history, we present to you the most dangerous, the most cunning, the most adaptable species ever discovered. The crowd pressed closer to the screens as the cameras focused on a small transport vessel descending toward the first moon's surface. Inside that vessel, barely visible through the reinforced windows, sat the day's entertainment, a single human male. "Behold," Veltar continued, his golden eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Specimen designation human 7749. Captured from the rim world of Kepler 442b during our latest acquisition raid. This particular specimen shows remarkable physical conditioning and, according to our psychological profiles, an unusually strong survival instinct." The human on the screen appeared unremarkable to most observers. Medium height, brown hair, lean but muscular build. He sat perfectly still in his restraints, staring straight ahead with dark eyes that revealed nothing. What the spectators couldn't see, what their advanced scanning technology had somehow missed, was the calculating intelligence behind those eyes, the mind that was already working on a dozen escape plans simultaneously. Marcus Chun had been a survival instructor, a former military reconnaissance specialist, and a deep space prospector before his capture. He'd survived 3 tours in hostile alien territories, lived through the collapse of a mining station on Titan 7, and spent 2 years alone on a death world after his ship crashed. The Zephyrians thought they had captured just another human. They had no idea they'd caught one of the most dangerous survivors humanity had ever produced. The transport vessel settled onto the purple grass with barely a whisper. Automated systems began their pre-hunt checklist. Atmospheric readings confirmed breathable air for the human, temperature within acceptable ranges, gravity at 95% Earth normal. The terrain scanner registered the locations of various predatory species scattered across the moon's surface, from the razor-clawed stalkers that hunted in packs to the massive stone crushers that could pulverize titanium with their bite. "The rules, as always, are elegantly simple," Veltar announced to his audience. "Our prey has 72 standard hours to survive. During this time, they will face not only the natural dangers of the preserve, but also our carefully selected hunters. Each hunter represents a different challenge: stealth, speed, raw power, technological superiority, and psychological warfare." The first hunter was already in position. Thara belonged to the Shadowkin species, beings evolved on a world of eternal twilight. Her body could bend light around itself, rendering her virtually invisible. Her bones were hollow like a bird's but stronger than steel, and her elongated limbs could extend or contract at will. She had never lost a hunt in 47 attempts, and her collection of trophies included the skulls of the most feared warriors from dozens of species. The second hunter represented pure technological superiority. Unit 9947 was a combat android from the Synthetic Collective, its body a masterwork of military engineering. Adaptive armor could deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts. Built-in weaponry included plasma cannons, molecular disruptors, and a neural scrambler that could incapacitate most organic minds from a kilometer away. Its analytical processors had studied the combat patterns of every known species and could predict behavioral responses with 97% accuracy. Waiting in the preserve's deepest caverns lurked the third hunter, Gorithmol, a beast thing from the nightmare world of Vex Prime. Standing 4 meters tall on 6 multi-jointed legs, its body was a fusion of organic tissue and living metal. Acid dripped constantly from its mandibles, capable of eating through any known material in seconds. Its hide could deflect Starship-grade weaponry, and its regenerative capabilities meant that even massive trauma would heal within hours. It had been captured at enormous cost after it single-handedly destroyed an entire military outpost. The fourth hunter relied on speed and precision. Zixera represented the Blitz species, evolved on a high-gravity world where reflexes meant the difference between life and death. She could move faster than most beings could track, her nervous system operating at speeds that made seconds feel like hours. Her weapons were simple, but deadly, monomolecular blades that could cut through anything, thrown with such precision that she could sever arteries from hundreds of meters away. The final hunter was perhaps the most dangerous, Mindweaver Shulneth of the Psychic Collective. It appeared as a floating mass of writhing tentacles surrounding a pulsing brain case, but its true weapon was its ability to invade and manipulate the thoughts of its prey. It could create illusions indistinguishable from reality, plant false memories, or simply drive its victims to madness through pure mental anguish. No being had ever resisted its psychic assault for more than 6 hours. The betting pools are now open, Veltar announced as the transport's restraints disengaged. Current odds favor a survival time of less than 4 hours, with Mindweaver Shulneth as the most likely victor. However, I encourage you to consider the human's reputation for unpredictability. Marcus felt the restraints release and immediately began his assessment. The transport's internal sensors showed external temperature at 18 degrees Celsius, humidity at 40%, wind speed negligible. The gravity felt comfortable, close enough to Earth normal that his muscle memory would function properly. Through the viewport, he could see the purple grassland stretching to a line of crystalline formations about 2 kilometers away. Behind those formations, darker areas suggested either forest or canyon systems. The transport door began to iris open, and Marcus made his first crucial decision. Instead of immediately exiting, he spent precious seconds examining the vessel itself. The transport was clearly expensive technology, probably automated, definitely equipped with monitoring systems. But it was also his first potential resource. He moved quickly through the small cabin, his hands finding and disabling 3 different tracking devices with practiced efficiency. His military training had included extensive counter-surveillance techniques, and the Zephyrian technology, while advanced, followed predictable patterns. The 4th tracking device was more cleverly concealed, embedded in the sole of his left boot. He removed it carefully, noting its design. This one will be useful later. The emergency toolkit yielded better treasures. A basic medical scanner, emergency rations for 3 days, a water purification unit, and, most importantly, a maintenance multi-tool with cutting implements and molecular welders. The transport's own maintenance logs, accessible through a simple interface hack, told him everything he needed to know about the preserve's monitoring systems. By the time Marcus finally stepped onto the purple grass, he had already gained 6 critical advantages: freedom from tracking, basic tools, food and water security, knowledge of the monitoring network, a detailed scan of his immediate environment, and, most importantly, the element of surprise. The hunters and spectators expected a panicked animal fleeing blindly into the wilderness. Instead, they got a predator who was already planning their deaths. The grass crunched softly under his feet as he moved away from the transport. The sound was different from Earth vegetation, more crystalline, and he filed that information away. Sound would be crucial in the coming hunt. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat could mean the difference between life and death. Above him, the twin suns cast multiple shadows that would make visual tracking more difficult. The air carried scents that his human nose couldn't identify, but would need to learn. His ears picked up the distant sounds of the preserve's ecosystem. Something large moving through the crystalline formations, the buzz of flying creatures, and underneath it all, a subsonic hum that suggested active technology. Marcus had survived in hostile environments before, but this was different. This wasn't nature trying to kill him. This was intelligence, planning, and resources dedicated specifically to his death. The hunters weren't just predators. They were professionals with advantages he couldn't match in direct confrontation. But he had advantages too. Human adaptability was legendary throughout known space, even if most species underestimated it. Human persistence hunting had evolved over millions of years, creating a species that could outlast almost any predator. Human intelligence was creative and unpredictable in ways that analytical minds struggled to counter. Most importantly, Marcus understood something about hunting that his pursuers had forgotten in their millennia of technological superiority. The most dangerous predator wasn't the strongest or fastest or smartest. It was the one that turned the hunt around, the one that made the hunters into prey. He chose his direction carefully, angling toward the crystalline formations, but not directly. His path would take him past several small hills that would provide both cover and vantage points. More importantly, it would lead him through terrain that favored mobility over raw power, intelligence over brute force. The first phase of his survival plan was simple: learn the preserve's layout, identify resources, and avoid contact with the hunters until he understood their capabilities. The second phase would be more complex: turn their advantages against them. The third phase would be the most dangerous: take the hunt to them. Marcus had studied enough alien psychology during his military service to understand the mindset of his captors. They expected entertainment. They expected a show. They expected their victim to run, hide, and die in interesting ways. They did not expect their victim to hunt them back. The tracking device from his boot had given him valuable information about the preserve's communication network. It operated on multiple frequencies with redundant systems, but, like all networks, it had vulnerabilities. The medical scanner, modified with components from the multi-tool, could detect the electromagnetic signatures of nearby technology. The water purification unit, surprisingly, contained rare earth elements that could be weaponized under the right circumstances. But his greatest weapon was knowledge. Marcus understood that every hunt followed patterns, and patterns could be predicted and exploited. The Zephyrians might have superior technology, but they had also grown comfortable in their dominance. Comfort was the enemy of survival, and their captive was about to teach them why humans had carved out their own corner of the galaxy despite being younger and weaker than most spacefaring species. The grass gave way to rocky ground as he approached the first of the small hills. The stone was similar to granite, but with veins of some metallic substance running through it. The metal might be useful later. Everything was potentially useful if you understood how to use it. Marcus began his climb, moving with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to conserve energy while covering ground quickly. Behind him, the transport was already lifting off, programmed to return to the hunting vessel. Above him, the twin suns continued their dance across an alien sky. Ahead of him lay 72 hours that would either end in his death or begin the galaxy's education about why humans were called the apex survivors of known space. The hunt was about to begin, but Marcus Chon was no longer thinking like prey. He was thinking like a predator, and somewhere in the preserve, 5 of the galaxy's most dangerous hunters were about to learn that they had made a critical error in judgment. They had given a human time to think. From his position on the rocky outcropping, Marcus could see the entire first moon stretched out before him like a tactical map. The crystalline formations he'd spotted earlier were even more impressive up close, towering structures that caught and refracted the twin suns' light into thousands of rainbow patterns. But what caught his attention wasn't their beauty, it was their potential. The crystals formed a natural maze, with passages large enough for a human, but too narrow for anything significantly larger. More importantly, the electromagnetic readings from his modified medical scanner showed massive interference patterns around the formations. Whatever those crystals were made of, they played havoc with electronic systems. His first pursuer was already moving. Through the scope, he'd improvised from the transport's emergency beacon and the medical scanner's lens assembly. Marcus watched Kthar's nearly invisible form gliding across the purple grassland. The Shadowkin moved like liquid darkness, her form shifting and bending light around itself until only the slightest distortion marked her passage. She was good, better than good. Her approach showed tactical sophistication that spoke of decades of experience. She moved in an irregular pattern that would make targeting difficult, used natural cover effectively, and, most dangerously, she was patient. Instead of rushing toward his last known position, she was establishing a perimeter and slowly contracting it. But Thara had made one crucial mistake. She was hunting a human, and humans had spent millions of years learning to track creatures that didn't want to be found. Marcus had noticed something during his observation that Ktharia's perfect stealth couldn't hide. The purple grass bent under her weight, and while her optical camouflage was flawless, it couldn't change the fact that she had mass. More importantly, the grass stayed bent for several minutes after she passed, creating a trail that was invisible to most detection systems, but perfectly clear to eyes that knew what to look for. He traced her movement pattern for 20 minutes, learning her habits. Thara favored her right side when changing direction, probably an old injury that had never fully healed. She paused every 30 seconds to scan for threats, and during those pauses, she always positioned herself near cover. She was methodical, professional, and completely predictable once you understood her patterns. Marcus began his counterhunt. He moved down the far side of the rocky hill, using the stone to mask his heat signature from any thermal scanners. The route he chose would take him in a wide circle around Ktharia's position, moving parallel to her line of advance. His goal wasn't to confront her, not yet. First, he needed to level the playing field. The crystalline formations were even more interesting up close. The structures weren't natural formations. They were clearly artificial, though built by what species and for what purpose remained unclear. The crystals hummed with stored energy, and his scanner readings showed massive amounts of electromagnetic interference. Perfect. Marcus spent precious minutes studying the crystal matrix, tracing the flow of energy through the structures with his scanner. The pattern became clear after several minutes of observation. The crystals formed a network, each structure connected to its neighbors through underground conduits. The entire formation was essentially a massive electromagnetic pulse generator, probably designed as some kind of planetary defense system eons ago. And it was still functional. The control interface was almost primitive compared to modern galactic technology, but that worked in Marcus's favor. Simple systems were harder to secure and easier to hack. Using components cannibalized from his various devices, he was able to access the network's basic functions within an hour. The system was designed to generate focused electromagnetic pulses at specific frequencies. More importantly, it could track electronic signatures within its area of effect and target them individually. Marcus spent another 30 minutes learning the control protocols, then began to implement his plan. Thara was closing in on his previous position, her stealth field still perfectly functional. What she didn't realize was that her optical camouflage system was broadcasting a very specific electromagnetic signature, one that the crystal network could now identify and track. Marcus waited until she was perfectly positioned within the formation's range, then activated the pulse. The effect was spectacular. Ktharia's stealth field failed instantly, her form becoming fully visible for the first time since the hunt began. But the pulse did more than disable her camouflage. It also disrupted every piece of technology she carried, from her weapons to her communication systems to the neural implants that enhanced her natural reflexes. For the first time in her hunting career, Thara was vulnerable. She realized her situation instantly, her 4 decades of experience serving her well. Instead of panicking, she immediately sought cover among the crystal formations, her movements now fully visible but still lethally graceful. She was armed with traditional weapons, monomolecular blades, and projectile throwers that didn't rely on complex electronics, but her greatest advantages had been neutralized. Marcus watched her adapt to the situation with professional admiration. Even without her technological advantages, Thara was a formidable opponent. Her natural speed and agility were impressive, and her knowledge of the preserve gave her significant advantages. But now they were fighting on equal terms, and equal terms favored the human. He began the hunt proper. Marcus had learned patience during his military reconnaissance training. He spent 2 hours mapping Kthara's new movement patterns, learning how she adapted to fighting without her stealth field. She was more cautious now, using hard cover instead of relying on camouflage, but she was also more predictable. The trap he set was elegantly simple. Using the multi-tools cutting implements, he weakened several support structures within a crystal formation, creating a deadfall that would trigger when someone of Kthara's weight passed underneath. The trigger was a length of metallic wires scavenged from the transport's electrical system, positioned at exactly the right height to catch her elongated limbs. But the deadfall wasn't meant to kill her. It was meant to disable her long enough for Marcus to close the distance. Kthara triggered the trap perfectly, her natural grace working against her for once. The falling crystal formation pinned her left leg, the impact stunning her long enough for Marcus to reach her position. She recovered quickly, her hand going her blade, but Marcus was already inside her guard. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Kthara was faster and stronger, but Marcus had advantages she couldn't match. Human anatomy, with its upright posture and opposable thumbs, was optimized for grappling. More importantly, Marcus had trained in combat techniques developed specifically for fighting non-human opponents. Kthara's elongated limbs were her greatest asset and her greatest weakness. Marcus used her leverage against her, applying pressure to joints that weren't designed to bend in certain directions. When she tried to use her superior reach, he closed the distance and fought in close quarters where her advantages became liabilities. The end came when Marcus managed to apply a chokehold technique adapted for non-human anatomy. Kthara's consciousness fled, her body going limp in his arms. She would live, but she was no longer a threat. Marcus took her weapons and communication equipment, then used her own restraints to secure her to one of the crystal formations. When she woke, she would find herself in the same position as countless victims before her, helpless and waiting for death. The only difference was that Marcus had no intention of killing her. Not yet. High above the preserve, the observation deck had fallen silent. The wealthy spectators stared at their screens in disbelief, their certainty shaken by what they had witnessed. Huntmaster Veltar's four hands clenched into fists as he processed the implications of what had just happened. "Impossible," whispered a Centauri merchant, his crystalline form refracting nervous light patterns. "Kthara has never been defeated. Never." "The human cheated," growled a Vorthan war chief, his tusks clicking with agitation. "It used the Preserve's own systems against her. That's not hunting, that's terrorism." Veltar studied the screens more carefully, his predatory mind analyzing what he had witnessed. The human hadn't just survived Kthara's attack. He had turned the hunt around, making the hunter into prey. Worse, he had done it using intelligence and adaptability rather than superior technology or natural advantages. "Adjust the parameters," Veltar ordered his technicians. "Increase the difficulty level. Release unit 9947 ahead of schedule, and authorize the use of its full combat protocols." On the preserved surface, Marcus was already moving again. He had studied the locations of the other hunters during his observation period, and Unit 9947's position was the most predictable. Combat androids followed logical protocols, and logical protocols could be anticipated and countered. But first, he needed to gather intelligence on his remaining opponents. Kthara's communication equipment included detailed files on each hunter, their capabilities, their hunting records, and, most importantly, their psychological profiles. Marcus spent an hour reading through the data, his respect for his opponents growing with each file. Unit 9947 was exactly what he had expected, a perfect killing machine with every technological advantage imaginable. But its perfection was also its weakness. Androids relied on programming and protocols, making them predictable to anyone who understood their operational parameters. Gorithmal was more dangerous, a creature of instinct and hunger with no tactical sophistication but enormous physical advantages. Fighting it directly would be suicide, but creatures of instinct had weaknesses that could be exploited. Zixera represented pure speed and precision, advantages that no human could match in direct confrontation. But speed required space to maneuver, and precision required clear lines of sight. The right terrain could neutralize both advantages. Mindweaver Shulneth was the most dangerous of all. Its psychic abilities could overwhelm most organic minds in seconds, creating illusions or simply driving victims to madness. But psychic attacks required focus and proximity, and both could be disrupted under the right circumstances. Marcus began to formulate a comprehensive strategy. He couldn't fight all four remaining hunters simultaneously, but he didn't need to. He needed to isolate them, neutralize their advantages one by one, and use their own strengths against them. The key was to control the battlefield, to choose when and where each confrontation would take place. The preserve was huge, but it wasn't infinite. There were bottlenecks, choke points, areas where superior technology or natural advantages meant nothing. He started with Unit 9947, partly because androids were predictable and partly because its technology would be useful in dealing with the other hunters. The android was currently positioned near the preserve's central processing facility, probably drawn by the electromagnetic signatures of the equipment housed there. Marcus began his approach carefully, using every piece of cover available. The android's sensors were incredibly sophisticated, but they were also calibrated for detecting known threats. A human moving with patience and intelligence, using natural camouflage and electromagnetic interference, might be able to get close enough to exploit the android's few vulnerabilities. The approach took 4 hours, but Marcus finally reached a position where he could observe Unit 9947 directly. The android was even more impressive than its specifications had suggested, a masterwork of military engineering that moved with mechanical precision and scanned its environment with methodical thoroughness. But as Marcus watched, he began to notice patterns in its behavior. The android's patrol route was perfectly logical and completely predictable. Its scanning protocols followed standard military doctrine, which Marcus had studied extensively during his service. Most importantly, its programming prioritized efficiency over creativity, making it vulnerable to tactics that fell outside standard combat doctrine. Marcus smiled for the first time since his capture. He was beginning to understand why humans had managed to carve out their own corner of the galaxy. They might not be the strongest or fastest or smartest species in known space, but they were the most adaptable. And adaptability, in the right circumstances, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The hunt was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The apex predators who had thought themselves invincible were about to learn what it meant to be prey. And their education was going to be conducted by a species that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of survival against impossible odds. Unit 9947 was a marvel of synthetic evolution, its body crafted from materials that existed nowhere in nature. Adaptive armor shifted and flowed like liquid metal, constantly adjusting its composition to counter detected threats. Built-in weapon systems could emerge from any point on its frame in milliseconds, and its analytical processors operated at speeds that made human thought seem glacial by comparison. But Marcus had identified 3 critical vulnerabilities during his observation. The android's power source, while incredibly advanced, required regular cooling cycles that lasted exactly 47 seconds every 2 hours. Its sensor array, for all its sophistication, had blind spots created by its own weapon systems when they were deployed. Most importantly, its programming followed strict prioritization protocols that could be manipulated by someone who understood military doctrine. Marcus waited for the cooling cycle, timing his approach to coincide with the android's most vulnerable moment. When Unit 9947 systems temporarily reduced power to prevent thermal overload, Marcus made his move. He didn't attack the android directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, he attacked its environment. The central processing facility was filled with electromagnetic equipment that created a complex interference pattern. Marcus had spent the last 2 hours mapping that pattern with Cthulhu's scanner, identifying the frequencies and power levels that would cause the most disruption. Using components from his improvised toolkit, he created a feedback loop in the facility's power grid. The resulting electromagnetic pulse wasn't powerful enough to damage Unit 9947's hardened systems, but it was precisely calibrated to create sensor shadows and communication dead zones throughout the facility. Unit 9947 detected the interference immediately, its threat assessment protocols categorizing the phenomenon as a potential ambush scenario. The android responded exactly as Marcus had predicted, deploying its full sensor array and weapon systems to maximum readiness. In doing so, it created the very blind spots Marcus needed to approach undetected. The human moved through the facility like a ghost, using the electromagnetic interference to mask his heat signature and the android's own weapon systems to block its visual sensors. He carried with him a device improvised from the transport's emergency beacon, Kthar's communication equipment, and half the components from his medical scanner. Unit 9947 first detected something was wrong when its cooling cycle failed to engage properly. The android's internal temperature began rising beyond safe parameters, triggering automatic shutdown protocols for non-essential systems. As its processing power decreased, its tactical awareness suffered, creating the opening Marcus needed. The human emerged from behind a bank of processing equipment, moving within human speed and precision. But he wasn't attacking the android. He was attacking the facility's primary power coupling, the one that supplied energy to the entire complex. His improvised device latched onto the coupling like a technological parasite, immediately beginning to drain power from the grid. Unit 9947 responded instantly, its plasma cannons swiveling to target the intruder. But Marcus had already moved, disappearing back into the electromagnetic maze he had created. The android shots struck empty air and processing equipment, the energy blasts adding to the chaos of interference patterns filling the facility. The android's tactical protocols were clear: eliminate the threat, secure the facility, maintain operational integrity. But as the power drain continued and the interference patterns grew stronger, Unit 9947 found itself in an impossible situation. Its target was invisible to sensors, its environment was increasingly hostile, and its own systems were being compromised by energy starvation. Marcus struck again from a completely different direction, his improvised weapon now attached to a secondary power coupling. The android's response time was still inhuman fast, but it was no longer fast enough. The human was playing a game of three-dimensional chess, using the facility's own systems as his pieces. By the time Unit 9947 realized it was being systematically dismantled rather than directly attacked, it was too late. The android's power levels had dropped below combat effectiveness, its weapon systems cycling down to preserve core functions. Its adaptive armor began to stiffen as power to the modification systems was reduced, and its sensor array contracted to basic visual and auditory inputs. Marcus appeared one final time, not as an attacker, but as a victor already assured of his success. In his hands was a device cobbled together from the android's own technology, components stripped from damaged systems during the chaos of the electromagnetic battle. Your programming includes self-preservation protocols, Marcus said, speaking directly to the android's audio sensors. I know because I've read your operational manual. You're required to minimize damage to yourself when faced with unwinnable scenarios. Unit 9947's optical sensors focused on the human with mechanical precision. Its voice, when it responded, carried no emotion but perfect clarity. You are correct. Current tactical assessment indicates a 0% probability of mission success and a 97% probability of irreparable damage if engagement continues. Then you surrender? I enter passive mode, pending new operational parameters, the android replied. You have demonstrated superior tactical capability within this specific environment. Analysis indicates you possess military training consistent with human special forces doctrine. Marcus nodded, unsurprised by the android's analytical capabilities. Your analysis is correct. I'm going to shut down your mobility systems now. You won't be damaged, but you won't be hunting me anymore either. The device in Marcus's hands was a masterwork of improvised engineering. Using the android's own technology against it, he had created a targeted electromagnetic pulse weapon that could disrupt specific systems without causing total shutdown. Unit 9947's legs locked into place as the pulse disabled its locomotion circuits, effectively turning the perfect killing machine into an immobile observer. Fascinating, Unit 9947 commented as its systems adapted to the new limitations. You have utilized resource scavenging, environmental manipulation, and tactical deception to defeat a technologically superior opponent. The psychological profile provided by the Zephyrians was significantly inaccurate. They don't understand humans very well. Marcus agreed, already moving toward the facility's exit. They think we're just another prey species. They've never bothered to study what makes us different. High above the preserve, the observation deck was in chaos. Wealthy spectators who had paid enormous sums to watch a guaranteed slaughter were instead witnessing the systematic dismantling of the galaxy's most feared hunters. Hunt Master Veltar's composed demeanor was cracking, his predatory confidence shaken by events that fell far outside his experience. "The human is cheating," snarled the draconic ambassador, her scaled hide flushed with embarrassment. "No prey species should be capable of defeating our hunters through mere cunning." "Cunning is not mere," replied a Vulcan observer with mathematical precision. "Cunning is the application of intelligence to survival scenarios. The human is demonstrating tactical capabilities that were not anticipated by the preserve's designers." Veltar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The human had neutralized 2 of his 5 hunters without killing either one, demonstrating restraint that spoke of strategic thinking rather than desperate survival. Worse, each victory had been accomplished through methods that turned the hunter's advantages against them. "Release Gorithmul," Veltar ordered. "Direct it toward the human's current position. If technology and stealth cannot stop this creature, perhaps brute force will succeed." On the preserve's surface, Marcus was already moving toward his next target. He had studied the files on all remaining hunters, and Gorithmul represented the simplest challenge from a tactical standpoint. The creature was essentially a biological weapon, all instinct and hunger with minimal intelligence. It could be predicted, manipulated, and ultimately defeated through proper planning. But first, he needed to gather additional resources. The central processing facility had provided him with valuable technology, but fighting Gorithmul would require different tools entirely. The beast's acidic secretions could dissolve any manufactured material in seconds, and its regenerative capabilities made conventional weapons useless. Marcus made his way toward the preserve's geological survey station, a facility he had identified during his initial reconnaissance. According to the preserve's maps, the station contained mineral analysis equipment and geological samples from across the 3-moon complex. More importantly, it would have access to the preserve's detailed topographical data. The journey took 3 hours, Marcus moving carefully to avoid detection by the preserve's monitoring systems. He had learned during his observation of Unit 9947 that the facility's sensor network could be fooled by someone who understood its operational parameters, but it required constant vigilance and careful route planning. The geological station was smaller than the central facility, but packed with more useful equipment. Mineral analyzers, rock crushers, chemical processing units, and, most importantly, detailed surveys of every cave system, mineral deposit, and geological formation across all 3 moons. Marcus spent an hour studying the geological data, paying particular attention to the volcanic activity that had shaped the preserve's terrain. The 2nd moon, where Gorithmul was currently hunting, showed extensive cave networks created by ancient lava flows. Many of those caves contained mineral deposits that would be highly useful in dealing with a regenerating biological weapon. The creature's file made for disturbing reading. Gorithmul had been captured on Vex Prime after it destroyed an entire military outpost, killing hundreds of soldiers armed with the galaxy's most advanced weapons. Its hide could deflect starship-grade energy weapons. Its acid could eat through battleship armor in minutes, and its regenerative capabilities allowed it to recover from massive trauma in hours. But every biological system had limitations, and Marcus was beginning to identify Gorithmul's vulnerabilities. The creature's massive size required enormous caloric intake to maintain its regenerative capabilities. Its acidic secretions were powerful but limited in quantity, requiring time to replenish. Most importantly, its primitive nervous system made it vulnerable to sensory overload and confusion. Marcus began gathering the materials he would need for his confrontation with the beast. The geological station's mineral samples included several rare earth elements that, when combined properly, created compounds with very specific properties. The chemical processing units allowed him to refine those elements into more concentrated forms. The result of his work was a collection of devices that looked more like geological instruments than weapons. Chemical markers that would be invisible to Gorthmol's primitive senses, but detectable by more sophisticated equipment. Mineral compounds that would react violently when exposed to the specific acids the creature secreted. Most importantly, a guidance system cobbled together from Unit 9947's navigation components and the geological station's seismic monitoring equipment. Gorthmol was already moving toward his position, its massive form leaving a trail of destruction through the preserve's carefully maintained environment. The creature moved with the single-minded purpose of a force of nature, following scent traces and heat signatures with primitive but effective hunting instincts. Marcus watched its approach through improvised monitoring equipment, studying the creature's movement patterns and behavioral responses. Gorthmol was even larger than the files had indicated, easily 4.5 meters tall and massing several tons. Its 6 legs moved with surprising coordination, and its mandibles dripped acid constantly, leaving smoking holes in the ground wherever it passed. The trap Marcus had prepared wasn't designed to kill the creature. That would have been impossible with the resources available. Instead, it was designed to use Gorthmol's own biology against it, turning its greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The first phase involved leading the creature into a specific cave system, one that Marcus had identified through careful study of the geological surveys. The caves were part of an ancient lava tube network, with multiple levels and passages that would constrain the creature's movement while providing escape routes for a more mobile opponent. Marcus positioned himself at the cave entrance as Gorthmol approached, making himself visible just long enough to ensure the creature detected his presence. Then, he disappeared into the cave system, moving quickly through passages he had memorized from the geological station's detailed maps. Gorthmol followed with predictable determination, its massive bulk squeezing through passages that were barely large enough to accommodate its bulk. The creature's acidic secretions ate away at the cave walls, gradually weakening the structural integrity of the entire system. Marcus led the beast deeper into the cave network, always staying just ahead of its grasping mandibles. The human moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent hours planning every turn, every passage, every possible escape route. Gorthmol followed with the relentless persistence of a biological weapon designed for one purpose: killing anything that moved. The final chamber was exactly what Marcus needed: a large cavern with multiple levels and a ceiling supported by natural rock formations. More importantly, it was directly above a major mineral deposit that the geological surveys had identified as highly unstable. As Gorthmol entered the chamber, Marcus triggered the first phase of his trap. The chemical markers he had placed throughout the cave system began reacting to the creature's acidic secretions, creating a chain reaction that filled the air with toxic compounds specifically designed to overwhelm Gorthmol's primitive nervous system. The creature's response was immediate and violent. Disoriented by the chemical assault, Gorthmol began attacking everything around it, its mandibles and claws tearing at the cave walls with mindless fury. The structural damage its acid had caused during the pursuit began to take its toll, cracks appearing in the ceiling as the creature's thrashing weakened the supporting formations. Marcus waited until the perfect moment, then triggered the second phase of his trap. The guidance system he had improvised sent a precise seismic pulse through the cave floor, destabilizing the mineral deposit directly below the chamber. The resulting collapse was carefully calculated, designed to bury Gorthmol under tons of rock, while leaving escape routes for a human-sized target. The creature disappeared under an avalanche of stone and mineral debris, its regenerative capabilities useless against the sheer mass of material now pinning it in place. Gorthmol would survive. Its biology was too robust for mere crushing to kill it permanently, but it would take weeks or months to dig itself out of the collapse. Marcus emerged from the cave system as the rumbling of the collapse faded. 3 of 5 hunters now neutralized through tactics that had used their own strengths against them. Above him, the twin suns were setting on the first day of what was supposed to be his execution. Instead, It was becoming a demonstration of why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous survivors. The twin suns cast long shadows across the preserve as Marcus made his way toward the third moon, where Zixera waited. The Blitz species hunter represented perhaps his greatest challenge yet, pure speed and precision that defied the laws of physics as most species understood them. Whereas previous opponents had relied on technology, stealth, or brute force, Zixera was evolution perfected for one purpose: killing with velocity that made time itself seem slow. Marcus had studied her profile extensively during his time in the geological station. Zixera had never missed a target in 43 hunts. Her reflexes operated at frequencies that allowed her to perceive and react to events that happened in microseconds. Her weapons were monomolecular blades that could cut through any known material, thrown with such precision that she could sever major arteries from distances that most beings couldn't even see clearly. But speed, for all its advantages, had limitations that could be exploited by someone who understood physics and psychology in equal measure. The transport system between moons was automated, designed to move hunters and monitoring equipment between different sections of the preserve. Marcus had spent considerable time studying the transport schedules and security protocols, identifying the perfect opportunity to infiltrate the system without triggering alarm protocols. The journey to the third moon gave him time to prepare for what would be his most complex hunt yet. Zixera's speed made direct confrontation impossible, but speed required certain environmental conditions to be effective. She needed clear lines of sight, stable footing, and enough space to maneuver. Remove any of those elements, and her greatest advantage became neutralized. The third moon's terrain was dramatically different from the others. Instead of grasslands and crystal formations, this moon featured dense jungle growth and massive tree structures that reached hundreds of meters into the sky. The canopy was so thick that the surface existed in perpetual twilight, creating an environment where visibility was measured in meters rather than kilometers. Marcus smiled as he studied the terrain through the transport's viewing ports. The Zephyrians had chosen this environment to challenge their prey's navigation abilities and to give Zixera multiple levels to hunt from. They hadn't considered that the same terrain that gave her hunting advantages could be turned against her. The transport deposited him on a landing platform built into one of the massive trees. The platform was clearly designed for aerial hunters like Zixera, providing multiple launching points and clear sight lines through the canopy. Marcus spent precious minutes studying the platform's construction, identifying its structural weaknesses and load-bearing limitations. The jungle around him was alive with sounds, not just the native wildlife, but the subtle whispers of movement that indicated Zixera was already hunting. She was close, probably within 100 meters, using the multiple levels of the canopy to mask her approach. Her speed would allow her to strike from any direction without warning, making traditional defensive positions useless. Marcus began implementing a strategy that went against every human instinct for survival. Instead of seeking cover, he made himself visible. Instead of trying to hide his location, he began moving through the canopy in patterns that would be easy to track. To any observer, he appeared to be making fatal tactical errors. But Marcus wasn't trying to hide from Zixera. He was trying to control her approach route. The jungle canopy was a three-dimensional maze of branches, vines, and leaves that created thousands of possible paths between any 2 points. But not all paths were equal. Some required precise timing and perfect balance. Others demanded specific approach angles to navigate safely. A few required the kind of split-second decision-making that even Zixera's enhanced reflexes might find challenging. Marcus had spent his transit time studying detailed surveys of the jungle, identifying the path networks that would be most advantageous for his purposes. Now he began moving through those networks and patterns designed to funnel Zixera towards specific locations where her speed would become a liability rather than an asset. The first indication that his strategy was working came as a whisper of displaced air, followed by the solid thunk of a monomolecular blade embedding itself in a tree trunk inches from his head. Zixera had struck from above and behind, her approach so fast that the sound of her movement arrived after the impact of her weapon. Marcus immediately changed direction, not away from the attack, but perpendicular to it, moving through a section of canopy where the branches were closely spaced and irregularly positioned. Behind him, he heard the whisper of Zixera's movement as she repositioned for another attack. The second strike came from his left flank, another monomolecular blade that would have severed his spine if he hadn't anticipated the attack vector. Instead of the blade finding flesh, it struck the improvised armor Marcus had constructed from materials scavenged during his previous hunts. Layers of metallic mesh from Cthulhu's equipment, ceramic plating from Unit 9947's damage systems, and impact-dispersing gel from the transport's emergency supplies. The armor wasn't designed to stop Zixera's weapons. Nothing could do that. But it was designed to deflect them slightly, just enough to turn fatal hits into glancing blows. More importantly, each deflected strike provided Marcus with crucial information about his opponent's position and attack patterns. Zixera's third attack came from directly ahead, her velocity so extreme that she seemed to materialize out of the air itself. But this time Marcus was ready. Instead of trying to dodge, he used the jungle's three-dimensional nature against her. The section of canopy he had chosen was supported by a complex network of interwoven branches and vines that created natural bottlenecks and obstacles. At the speed Zixera was moving, she couldn't adjust her trajectory fast enough to avoid the trap Marcus had led her into. Her momentum carried her directly into a tangle of vines that had been weakened with strategic cuts from his multi-tool. The vines, while too weak to stop her completely, were strong enough to alter her trajectory and disrupt her balance. For the first time in the hunt, Zixera found herself moving in a direction she hadn't chosen. Marcus was already moving to exploit the opening. His counterattack wasn't designed to match her speed. That would have been impossible. Instead, it was designed to predict where her disrupted trajectory would take her and to place obstacles in her path that would force her to choose between collision and deceleration. The chase that followed was unlike anything the Preserve had ever witnessed. Marcus moved through the canopy with practiced efficiency, using every advantage his human anatomy provided. His opposable thumbs allowed him to grip and swing with precision that Zixera's specialized limbs couldn't match. His upright posture gave him better balance on narrow branches. Most importantly, his ability to think in 3 dimensions let him plot courses that took advantage of the jungle's natural obstacles. Zixera followed within human speed, but for the first time in her hunting career, speed wasn't enough. The human was leading her through terrain specifically chosen to negate her advantages, forcing her to slow down or risk serious injury from collision with the increasingly dense network of branches and vines. The pattern continued for nearly an hour, Marcus always staying just ahead of his pursuer while gradually leading her toward the section of jungle he had chosen for the final confrontation. It was an area where the massive trees grew so closely together that their branches formed an almost solid ceiling, creating a natural arena with limited sight lines and no room for the kind of high-speed maneuvering that was Zixera's specialty. When Marcus finally stopped, it was in a clearing barely 10 meters across, surrounded by tree trunks so massive that they formed natural walls. The canopy overhead blocked most of the available light, creating an environment where speed was less important than positioning and timing. Zixera entered the clearing like a force of nature, her weapons already in motion before she had fully materialized from the jungle shadows. But the confined space worked against her, limiting her approach angles and forcing her to rely more on precision than velocity. The fight that followed was brief, but intense. Marcus couldn't match Zixera's speed, but he could predict it. Every movement she made was constrained by the physics of the environment and the limitations of her own biology. Her enhanced reflexes were calibrated for open spaces and clear sight lines, not for the close-quarters combat that the confined arena demanded. Marcus used every advantage his human evolution provided. His ability to fight while moving backward, a skill developed by ancestors who had hunted massive predators with primitive weapons. His capacity for complex tool use, allowing him to turn even simple environmental elements into weapons. Most importantly, his ability to think several moves ahead, planning strategies that turned his opponent's strengths into weaknesses. The decisive moment came when Zixera attempted one of her signature attacks, a high-speed strike from above that utilized her species' ability to wall-run up vertical surfaces. The attack would have been unstoppable in open terrain, but in the confined space of the arena, it left her committed to a single trajectory with no room for course correction. Marcus didn't try to avoid the attack. Instead, he turned it into a collision that he could control. Using a technique borrowed from Unit 9947's combat protocols, he positioned himself to redirect Zixera's momentum rather than absorb it. The result was that her incredible velocity carried her directly into one of the massive tree trunks with enough force to stun even her enhanced nervous system. The impact left Zixera temporarily disoriented, her enhanced reflexes unable to compensate for the neurological disruption caused by the collision. Marcus used those precious seconds to implement the restraint system he had prepared, a network of cables and pulleys scavenged from the transport system and positioned throughout the arena during his hour-long pursuit. When Zixera's consciousness cleared, she found herself immobilized by a web of restraints that used her own struggles against her. The harder she fought, the tighter the system became, until even her enhanced strength wasn't enough to break free. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice carrying the shock of someone experiencing defeat for the first time in decades. "No prey species moves like that. No prey species thinks like that." "We're not prey," Marcus replied, already beginning to gather the equipment he would need for his final hunt. "Humans stopped being prey a long time ago. The galaxy just hasn't figured that out yet." High above the preserve, the observation deck had descended into chaos. Wealthy spectators who had paid fortunes to witness a guaranteed slaughter were instead watching the systematic destruction of the galaxy's most feared hunting preserve. Hunt Master Veltar's composure had completely cracked, his predatory arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. "4 hunters," he snarled at his technical staff. 4 of the deadliest beings in known space, defeated by a single human using improvised tactics and scavenged equipment. "How is this possible?" "Perhaps," suggested a celestial observer with crystalline precision, "our understanding of human capabilities has been fundamentally flawed. Perhaps we have mistaken their apparent weakness for actual vulnerability." Veltar's 4 hands clenched into fists as he stared at the tactical displays. The human was moving again, heading directly toward the final moon where Mind-Weaver Shulneth waited. The psychic entity was the most dangerous hunter in the preserve, capable of destroying minds from kilometers away. "Shulneth will succeed," Veltar declared with false confidence. "Psychic assault cannot be countered by improvised technology or environmental manipulation. The human's mind will be destroyed within minutes of contact." But as Marcus made his way toward the final confrontation, he carried with him more than just scavenged equipment and improvised weapons. He carried the knowledge gained from each previous hunt, the understanding of how supposed apex predators could be defeated through intelligence and adaptability. Most importantly, he carried something that none of his opponents possessed: the evolutionary legacy of a species that had spent millions of years learning to survive against creatures that should have been able to kill them easily. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or physical prowess. It was the absolute refusal to accept that anything was unbeatable. The final hunt was about to begin, and the galaxy's most dangerous psychic predator was about to learn why humans were called the apex survivors of known space. The 4th moon hung in the void like a diseased pearl, its surface scarred by psychic storms that had raged for millennia. Here, where reality bent to the will of powerful minds, Mind-Weaver Shulneth waited in its domain of twisted thoughts and impossible geometries. This was where the hunt would end, one way or another. Marcus stood at the edge of the transport platform, studying the alien landscape through sensors that flickered and failed as they tried to process scenes that violated the fundamental laws of physics. The very air seemed thick with malevolent intelligence, and the horizon shifted constantly as psychic energies warped space-time itself. During his journey to the final moon, Marcus had spent every available moment preparing for what would be his most dangerous confrontation. Mind-Weaver Shulneth wasn't just a predator. It was a force of nature that could rewrite the basic functions of organic minds. No amount of tactical planning or improvised technology could protect against an attack that struck directly at consciousness itself. But Marcus had one advantage that even Shulneth couldn't anticipate. He understood the fundamental difference between human psychology and that of every other species in the galaxy. Where other beings possessed minds that followed logical patterns and predictable neural pathways, human consciousness was chaotic, creative, and fundamentally irrational in ways that had taken millions of years of evolution to develop. The transport's emergency supplies had provided him with an unexpected asset, a basic neural interface designed for emergency medical procedures. The device was primitive compared to modern psychic shielding technology, but its simplicity was actually an advantage. Complex systems could be overwhelmed or subverted by a powerful psychic attack, but crude analog circuits might be too primitive for a sophisticated entity like Shulneth to manipulate. Marcus had spent hours modifying the interface using components scavenged from his previous hunts. Thar-S stealth technology provided signal-dampening capabilities. Unit 9947's analytical processors had yielded quantum encryption algorithms. Zixera's neural enhancement systems contributed biofeedback regulators. The result was a device that looked like a collection of random electronics, but functioned as the most advanced psychic defense system ever improvised by human ingenuity. But the device was only part of his strategy. The real weapon Marcus carried was something no technology could replicate: the human capacity for control madness. He had learned during his military psychological training that human consciousness operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The rational mind that other species recognized was only the surface layer. Beneath it lay older, more primitive levels of awareness that had evolved during humanity's long climb from the primordial chaos of Earth. Those deeper layers followed patterns that no alien psychology could predict or understand. Marcus began his descent into the moon's psychic maelstrom with a mental technique taught to him by a Zen master during his survival training. The method involved deliberately fragmenting his consciousness into multiple parallel streams of thought, each one operating independently, while sharing information through quantum-entangled neural pathways that existed outside normal space-time. The effect was to create a mind that was simultaneously focused and chaotic, rational and insane, predictable and utterly random. Any psychic attack that tried to target his consciousness would find itself confronting not one mind, but dozens, each one thinking different thoughts and following different logical patterns. The landscape around him began to shift as he moved deeper into Shulneth's domain. Rock formations became impossible sculptures that hurt to look at directly. The sky overhead displayed colors that had no names and patterns that induced nausea in anyone who stared too long. Gravity itself became negotiable, requiring constant concentration to maintain normal orientation. Marcus felt the first tendrils of psychic contact as gentle whispers at the edge of his consciousness. Shulneth was testing his mental defenses, probing for weaknesses with the delicate touch of a master predator. The entity's psychic signature was unlike anything Marcus had encountered: vast, ancient, and utterly alien in its intellectual architecture. The whispers became voices, offering comfort and safety if he would just surrender to the inevitable. They promised an end to pain, an escape from the constant struggle of survival, a peaceful death that would be swift and merciful. The voices spoke with perfect knowledge of his fears and desires, crafted to appeal to the deepest levels of human psychology. But Marcus's fragmented consciousness allowed him to analyze the attack even as he experienced it. The voices were remarkably sophisticated, demonstrating an understanding of human psychology that should have been impossible for an alien mind to achieve. But they were based on outdated data, psychological profiles that assumed human consciousness operated like other species. The real attack came without warning, a psychic assault designed to overload his neural pathways with pure terror and despair. Shulneth's full power struck his mind like a tsunami of darkness, carrying with it the accumulated fear and suffering of 1,000 previous victims. The attack was powerful enough to drive most beings instantly insane, overwhelming their consciousness with more horror than any organic mind could process. Marcus's response was uniquely human. Instead of trying to resist the attack, he embraced it. His fragmented consciousness absorbed the psychic assault across multiple mental streams, diluting its power and preventing any single stream from being overwhelmed. More importantly, his chaotic thought patterns began to contaminate the attack itself, introducing elements of human irrationality that Shulneth's logical mind couldn't process. The result was feedback, psychic energy flowing backward through the connection, carrying with it the fundamental chaos that lay at the heart of human consciousness. For the first time in its millennia-long existence, Mind-Weaver Shulneth encountered a mind that was more alien to it than it was to its victim. The landscape around Marcus convulsed as Shulneth recoiled from the unexpected contact. Rock formations rearranged themselves into new configurations, and the impossible colors in the sky began to fade toward more normal spectral ranges. The entity's control over its domain was slipping as it struggled to comprehend the paradox of Marcus's mental architecture. Marcus pressed his advantage, using techniques developed by human mystics and philosophers over thousands of years. He began to think in ways that violated the fundamental assumptions of rational consciousness, holding contradictory beliefs simultaneously, experiencing emotions that had no logical basis, and following thought patterns that curved back on themselves in impossible loops. The effect on Shulneth was catastrophic. The entity's consciousness, evolved for perfect logical consistency and absolute mental control, began to fracture as it tried to process thoughts that made no rational sense. Its psychic attacks became increasingly desperate and unfocused, lashing out with raw power rather than surgical precision. Marcus began his counterattack by doing something that no other species in the galaxy could have conceived. He started telling jokes. Human humor was based on patterns of expectation and surprise that existed nowhere else in galactic consciousness. The ability to find amusement in chaos, to laugh at death and disaster, to create meaning from meaninglessness. These were uniquely human traits that had evolved as psychological survival mechanisms during humanity's violent rise from primitive barbarism. Each joke, each moment of absurd humor, struck Shulneth's consciousness like a physical blow. The entity's mind, structured around concepts of logical progression and inevitable outcomes, couldn't process the notion that intelligence could find genuine amusement in failure, defeat, and destruction. The psychic landscape began to collapse as Shulneth's control disintegrated. Impossible geometries simplified into normal three-dimensional space. Gravity resumed its proper function. The tormented sky cleared to reveal the normal stars and cosmic phenomena that surrounded the preserve. But Marcus wasn't finished. Drawing on every aspect of human creativity and irrationality, he began to assault Shulneth's consciousness with concepts that were fundamentally incomprehensible to the entity's logical mind. Art for art's sake, love without purpose, sacrifice without reward, the beauty of failure, the wisdom of foolishness. Each concept struck deeper than the last, unraveling the carefully structured architecture of Shulneth's consciousness. The entity had spent millennia perfecting its mental defenses against every known form of psychic attack, but it had no defense against the organized chaos that was human thought. The final blow came when Marcus shared his most human characteristic of all, hope in the face of absolute despair. Even now, facing the most dangerous psychic predator in known space, isolated and outnumbered on an alien world, he maintained the irrational belief that somehow, someway, things would work out. It was a belief that had no logical foundation, no rational justification, no reasonable expectation of fulfillment. And it was absolutely indestructible. Shulneth's consciousness shattered like glass, its millennia of accumulated experience and power dispersing into the psychic ether. The entity's physical form, the writhing mass of tentacles and exposed brain tissue, collapsed into unconsciousness as its mind retreated to its most primitive defensive state. For the first time in 3 centuries, the fourth moon fell silent. Marcus stood alone in the sudden quiet, his improvised neural interface smoking from overload, and his consciousness slowly reassembling into its normal unified state. Around him, the landscape had returned to its natural configuration, a barren but beautiful world of crystalline formations and exotic minerals. High above the preserve, the observation deck of the Apex Dominion had fallen into stunned silence. Huntmaster Veltar stared at his displays with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of the universe had just been proven completely wrong. Impossible, he whispered. Mindweaver Shulneth was undefeatable. It had never even been challenged, much less, perhaps, interrupted a human voice from the back of the observation deck. Your definition of undefeatable was simply too narrow. The assembled spectators turned to see a figure they had not noticed before. A human woman in the uniform of the Terran Colonial Authority, flanked by soldiers whose weapons were already trained on the Zephyrian crew. Allow me to introduce myself, the woman said with deadly politeness. I am Admiral Sarah Chun, commanding officer of the TCA vessel Retribution. The human you've been hunting is my brother. Veltar's four hands reached for weapons that were no longer there, his predatory instincts finally recognizing the trap he had walked into. Impossible. This preserve is protected by interstellar law. The Galactic Council, Admiral Chun interrupted, has been investigating reports of sentient species being kidnapped for illegal hunting expeditions. We've been tracking your operation for months, waiting for the right moment to gather evidence. She gestured toward the screens that still showed Marcus standing victorious on the fourth moon surface. My brother volunteered to be captured, to provide us with legal justification for what comes next. The bridge erupted in chaos as Zephyrian security forces tried to respond to the intrusion, only to discover that their weapons systems had been quietly disabled by human sabotage. The Apex Dominion, for all its technological sophistication, had been designed for hunting prey, not for fighting a military engagement against an equal technological power. Your hunting preserve, Admiral Chun announced as her soldiers secured the bridge, is now evidence in a war crimes tribunal. Your so-called apex predators will be treated and returned to their homeworlds. And you, Huntmaster Veltar, are under arrest for crimes against sentient species. On the preserve's surface, Marcus was already making his way toward the transport platform, where a TCA shuttle waited to extract him. The 72-hour hunt had become a 6-hour demonstration of human capability, but, more importantly, it had provided the evidence needed to shut down the galaxy's most notorious hunting preserve. As the shuttle lifted off from the fourth moon's surface, Marcus looked back at the preserve one last time. Somewhere in those alien landscapes, 5 of the galaxy's most feared predators were learning what it meant to be helpless, to be at the mercy of beings they had considered inferior. It was a lesson that the galaxy would not soon forget. The news of the preserve's destruction spread through galactic civilization like wildfire. The story of a single human defeating 5 apex predators using nothing but intelligence and improvised technology became legend within months. More importantly, it sparked a fundamental re-evaluation of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. Species that had dismissed humans as weak and primitive began to study them with new respect. The concept of apex survivor entered galactic vocabulary as a way to describe beings who could thrive in any environment, under any conditions, against any odds. And in the halls of galactic power, a new understanding began to emerge. The universe's most dangerous predators weren't necessarily the strongest or fastest or smartest. They were the ones who could adapt, evolve, and overcome any challenge through sheer determination and creative intelligence. They were the ones who refused to accept that anything was truly unbeatable. They were human.